Hi guys, I'm Andy.
And I'm Andrew, and welcome to episode 6 of the Deco Mix.
In this episode of the Deco Mix, we'll be talking to Gareth Locke from the UK.
Gareth is the Director of Risk Management for GUE, and in 2016 he developed and launched his Human Factors Skills in Diving programs. On today's podcast, we're going to be talking to Gareth about these courses and about his experience in the industry.
The information he gave us is applicable to all levels of divers. So without further ado, let's welcome Gareth to our podcast.
Hi everybody, I'm Andrew, and today we've got Gareth with us from the founder, let's say, of Human Factors and counter-errorism in diving. And we're going to be talking about some interesting courses that Gareth has been producing and making and teaching, and listening to what he has to say. Gareth, we've known each other for a couple of years now, really, haven't we? A little bit of involvement with GUE, and we tried to get you over last year, February 2020, I think it was.
Yes, I know.
Something like that, yes. Yeah.
Right before everything started to go a little bit pear-shaped for everybody around the world.
Yes, I was in Minneapolis at the time teaching a Lifeline Aeromed team when it all went horribly wrong, and I left a day early because I didn't want to be stuck in Minneapolis.
Yeah, I think Andy was traveling back from Mexico at the time and going,
I was traveling back from Mexico.
I want to go to America and still get home.
Yeah, I was thinking about, like, I should just stay a little bit longer, and it's going to be like SARS, maybe a few more weeks, and Mexico is not a bad place to be stuck. But let's put it this way, I'm glad I went back the time I went back, because otherwise I might still be in Mexico as of now or something.
Yeah, totally.
So Gareth, tell anybody who's listening to this, tell them what exactly is Human Factors and sort of counter-errorism, and what are you doing, right?
Yeah, so the easiest way to get the concept across is to tell a story, I suppose. And I often talk about Homer Simpson and as an operator in a nuclear power station. And, we often see him sitting there in front of this desk with loads of buttons and knobs and dials and it's designed for an expert. And I think we could probably say that Homer's not an expert when it comes to, our perception of this. So, the human factor side of the interface between him and the equipment hasn't necessarily been taken into account. He's also got a bit of a caffeine and sugar addiction in terms of coffee and donuts. So that sustains him as well. When he gets a bit tired, it's a bit of coffee, a bit of a donut, rush, off we go. He's also subject to a social, commercial, professional pressure with Mr. Burns, who's always sitting there in the background going, keep the power on, keep the power on. Now, there's all of these things that interface or interact and Homer has to deal with. Now, on this particular day, he comes in and he's a bit late. And so he misses part of the brief. And Mr. Burns and his sidekick are talking about stuff, and he misses some of the information, but he was afraid of asking the questions, because the last time he asked some questions, people just made fun of him. Duh, Homer, don't you know about this stuff? So he stays quiet. So he goes into the, his control room, and he's doing his work, and it comes up to the hour and he's feeling a bit tired. So he takes his coffee and his donuts and he's fine, and he comes back to life again. But he's got a bigger slump after lunch, because he's got like that post-lunch slump where people, if you're ever involved in an instructional role, that the post-lunch slot is just like a nightmare. So he's already having an increased reduction in awareness. A bit of an oxymoron there, but he's having a greater impact. And it's coming up to the hour, and he thinks, oh, great, I've got some coffee, I've got a donut, I'll be on. And then all of a sudden, these lights and bells and alarms keep going, and he hasn't got a clue how to deal with it, because the training he's received hasn't been there to prepare him. It's about do this, but they don't teach for the emergencies. And through some trial and error, he resolves the problem. And it wasn't because of the badly designed checklist he had. It's just through muddling along. And actually, nobody really noticed it. There was a bit of a blip, and he dealt with it. And he thought, well, there's no point in reporting this because nobody ever listens to what I say. And even if I do report it, then nothing actually gets done. In fact, yeah, I do remember that last year something similar happened and and nothing happens. All of those elements are about human factors. They're about how he interacts with the system, how his body deals with it, the instruction, the training, the leadership, the sort of the safety and reporting. All of that goes into human factors. Now, if we look at that in the context of diving, it's about understanding how we as divers interact with our equipment, be that normal open circuit stuff or a side mount or rebreather. It's about how instructors interact with their students and the relationships they have in terms of leadership and followership and how they communicate with the rest of the team. It's how agencies manage performance and errors and deviations that go on out there. It's how we interact with the physical environment. So the water, the current, the temperature, the wrecks, the caves, or it could be the social environment. How easy is it to speak up and challenge and question what's going on? And when things go wrong, how do we report those? What do we report? What sort of detail goes into this? So human factors is a huge topic, but what it isn't just the factors of the human. It's not just human error. People go, human factor. That was the reason why that adverse event occurred. Or we'll just put it in a bucket of human error. It's not common sense. Common sense is developed over time. And you only normally say, oh, that was common sense after the event, when you can look back and join the dots and go, oh yeah, that led to that, oh, I wouldn't have made that mistake. Well, hang on a minute. Has that person ever encountered that scenario before? Nope. Right. So how would they know what to do? Well, because it's common sense. Well, it doesn't work that way. So trying to deal with the cognitive biases we have, where we look back and we can make sense more easily than in the here and the now, looking forward, because we never know with 100% certainty what the future looks like. So we make educated guesses as to the best outcomes. Now, that education comes through a variety of means, and it could be our own personal experiences, which are the strongest, as long as we reflect and learn from it, or we can learn from our first tier in our network, or we can learn from others that are out there. So it's a huge topic. There we go. I took a while to explain what human factors was.
No, it is an interesting topic, and when you put it like that, it's like I just immediately think of back in 1912 when the Titanic sank and they didn't have enough life vests.
Yeah, life raft. Yeah.
Right, and it took a tragedy of that magnitude for them to implement then actual policy procedures, standard, that it was, to us, we go common sense, right? You've got X amount of people on a ship.
Yeah.
And chances are it could go down. There is a chance it could go down, and we'd kind of like everybody to survive. So let's all give them at least one space on a life vest.
Yeah.
And that's common sense for us. But back at the turn of the 20th century, 1900s, that necessarily wasn't common sense, because clearly the biggest ship at the time did not have life vessels.
Well, it's also the mindset and the bias that said the ships are unsinkable. And even if you go all the way forward now to, and I can't, it's in early 2012, 14, somewhere around there, Costa Concordia sinking off Italy.
Yes.
And what's an interesting bit there where they ran aground and it started to list. Now, there are nearly 4,500 people on that cruise liner. You have to do a roll call. Now, when was the last time anybody practiced doing a full-scale roll call of 4,500 people?
Yeah.
Now, the International Maritime Code said you've got to have enough lifeboats plus a little bit of extra. Now, what you do is you put them down each side, because that makes sense. And then it lists. And now you can't actually get the lifeboats to the water's edge, because the davits are not allowing the lifeboats to get onto the water. So even when we consider getting enough bums on seats, those bums might not be able to get to this, or those seats might not be able to get on the water because of the environment that's going on.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting because obviously, you know, I've been diving in the industry for 20 years, teaching for 20 years, and diving for 30 years. You know, seen a bit, but I've not experienced necessarily big things that would that in my mind would cause me to deviate necessarily from what I have been doing, and maybe learn from those. That I've had some things where I've gone, you know what, God, I got lucky there, and yeah, let's learn from that, shall we? And let's move forward a bit. Because you know, I pride myself in surrounding myself with education and taking classes and teaching in such a way, like you said, my first network of people that are surrounding me are people with huge amounts of experience, and you know, they've seen and done things that I can learn from them, or you know, and they can learn from my experiences, and we just all combine these things so that we don't necessarily have to go through all of these, like, you know, these changing scenarios that bring about sort of a light bulb moment, let's say, for us, and go, oh, we need to do that right.
And I think the hardest bit is looking at the conditions that led to the event. I think people are quite good at spotting what's happened, and you know, the debriefs normally are framed as what did we do well and what do we need to change. What they don't, you know, because we can observe those, that's quite easy. What's more difficult, and it's something that I really sort of teach in the classes, is, you know, what went well and why. Okay, what were the specific actions, conditions, behaviors that led us to have a successful outcome? So then once we've identified those, we can replicate them. And if something didn't go wrong, you know, it didn't go well, so it went wrong, and framing it in a positive bit, what can we improve and how are we going to do it? So again, we look at the specific bits of what steps are required to make the improvement, not, oh yeah, well, we need to communicate more clearly. Okay, that's great, but what was the breakdown, and what stopped the clear communication from happening? And it's hard because you've got to get people to think about these things, and it's quite amusing in the classes where I teach. And you know, we have a set framework for running a debrief, and I get people to write down the answers to the debrief before we go through it. And I warn them and say, if you come up with a single word answer in terms of what's happening, then actually I'm going to dig deeper. I'm going to ask you lots of questions. So if you just say, oh yeah, the teamwork was good. All right, give me a specific example of where teamwork worked. I don't know. Well, in that case, how do you get better? So when you've built up trust and psychological safety in your team, like you've got within your first, your first tier of network, then it's much easier to share those stories. And there is less shame involved when something goes wrong, because we like to pride ourselves on the work that we do, the diving we do, that all of the time and money we've invested in that. We don't want to say, I'm a dunce, I made a mistake. But if we can get around that and say, actually, everybody makes mistakes, then actually it's easier to have those conversations.
How much of an issue is this in your experience of people don't want to look stupid in front of others and don't want to admit things they don't want to talk about? Huge, right? I mean, it has to be huge.
Oh, massive. Okay, yeah. And the more senior you are in the industry, the harder it is. And I used to work for a consultancy called Paradigm, and their founder, a lady called Teresa Swinton, had a great phrase, which was, be aware of the shadow you cast. So when you're in a leadership position, your shadow will influence people below you. And the further you are up the organization, the longer that shadow is cast, and you're going to impact more people. And so as a consequence, if you have people at the very tops of the organizations who put their hands up and say, I am human, I make mistakes, and here is an example of it, the effects are massive, because people sit there and go, wow, I held this person on a pedestal of excellence, and they're human too. They make mistakes. Let me tell you a story.
Mm. Yeah, I think it is really one of those things where, I kind of like, I go back to when in terms of diving, I'm not one of the greats, but I've done a
You
few
are in
things.
somebody's eyes.
Yeah, in somebody's eyes. So, and it's very difficult. And I always look back at it and go, not many people critique me anymore, in my diving skills, in my knowledge, in my teaching. And that's why I kind of like end up going the more GUE route, let's say, because that didn't put me at the top. That put me actually at the bottom. and starting at the bottom of instruction with GUE, as well as everybody else, and working my way up. And that put me with people that actually I respected and could say, not that I didn't respect other people in other agencies, but I respected these people, and they actually analyzed what I was doing. And I found in myself that there was I wasn't perfect. Of course, I knew I wasn't perfect, but at the same time, it was really encouraging to hear other people say to me, "Actually, Andrew, you could do that better. That way you did there, and be specific, like you said. Give me actual specific examples of where I could improve in my diving, and what I was doing." And I really actually quite enjoy that side of it, because otherwise complacency sets in, right? And we all just go, "Well, aren't I great? I'm brilliant. I'm an instructor trainer, and I'm an instructor examiner, whatever. I've done all these dives, and aren't I brilliant?" And I find that in diving, well, in a lot of adventure sports, right, this is what leads to the accidents that happen, and unfortunate, people not making it back, because they believe, and there's stories over and over, and we're not going to get into those individual stories, but there's stories all over that we read about tragedies that happen, and it does stem from human factors, the whole ego, if you like, about diving.
But it requires also people to accept criticism, right? I mean, that's the other thing.
Yes.
I mean, how many people, and the higher up the ladder you are in diving, and a lot of people are, I wouldn't exclude myself, trying to be proud of what you achieved, and being more the alpha male type guy. You don't want to hear somebody below you telling you what went wrong, right? You know what I mean?
Totally.
And that's something I think everybody has to overcome, saying, okay, you know what, even a student, as Andrew said, we don't do everything right, but it's something you need to, sometimes, adjust and listen, right?
It's a huge cultural thing. So, my background is 25 years in the Royal Air Force as aircrew. I went through frontline squadrons operating about 2,500 hours. I was a flight instructor. I then went into trials, research and development, systems engineering, procurement. And, the Royal Air Force has got an aerobatic team, the Red Arrows. And if you listen, and there are examples of their debriefs that are available on YouTube, and people would just sit there, and the skill, when you listen and watch those debriefs, there is no ego. They leave their name badges and their sort of identity, their person identity at the door. They go in and they are read 1 to 9. It's not John, Billy, whatever it is. It is the formation positions, and they will replay the video, and the guys will self-debrief themselves. I'm a bit long, a bit fast, a bit late, and as the thing is talking, because that's how they get better. And if somebody in the formation, if the leader stands up and goes, yeah, that was great, and they don't talk about the mistakes they've made, they've blown it, because there is this level of trust that says, I can put my hand up and say, I screwed up because of this, this, and this is how I'm going to address it. But if the rest of the formation knows that you screwed up and you don't say it, they will know that you've done it, and you've just blown the trust that's there. So, it's about creating a learning culture within the team, within the organization, within your environment, your dive center, that says it doesn't matter how experienced you are. A, you're going to make mistakes, and B, you can always get better. And we have our own blind spots that stop us from getting better, because we sit there and go, yeah, nothing has gone wrong, therefore it must be okay.
Yeah. And that's actually a really good, that's actually that statement right there. Nothing went wrong, so it's okay. And that leads into doing it again and again. And you might get away with it 10 times. And it's the 11th time you don't get away with it. That's when we have the problem. And if you don't recognize these things, when you don't sort of debrief accordingly, or you don't reflect on things, even if it's not as a team, and even if you don't, you know, sort of, I finish a course and I reflect on how that course went. Is there something I could have done better? What was, I mean, we've got to recognize what was good as well. Not everything's bad, and not everything's about sort of picking holes in it, but it's like, what could have gone, what was the good, the bad, and the ugly, basically. And how can I do it? How would I do it differently if I was in XYZ scenario again? And it's a key skill, and it takes a particular person, as Andy said, that you've actually got to accept that first, that you are human, and you know. And
that starts with the instructor development process, where the instructors should be taught about talking about things that didn't go well in their instructional setup, because now you and because they're in role models. So that bit where I was sort of joking is that people will look up to you, Andrew, because people will. You're in that role modeling position. And if you sit there as a debrief and you start off and you say, right, as a learning environment, this is about getting better. This is about you helping me get better and me helping you get better, because you as students can teach me something. So I'm going to set up the scenario that says, actually, here's something that I didn't quite get right on that dive. And that requires you to be quite reflective and say, how do I get better? Once I've set the scene that says, I'm not perfect and this is where I can get better, you create a massive learning environment for the rest of them, because now you can turn around and go, wow, my instructor makes mistakes. So if I finish this class, I'm still going to make mistakes too. And I can talk about those. And it's about creating that, not this piece that says, if you think I did something wrong, speak up. Because there's that authority gradient where the students are just, oh, hang on a minute, you're holding my certification card. And if I question what you're doing, you could withhold that card from me. And I'm going to waste a bunch of time and money, and I'm not going to get the card that I want. So there's a lot of stuff that is not covered in training courses that really could be done, and could be done quite easily technically. It would take a huge cultural shift for it to happen, though. Yeah,
and we there are people. The encouraging thing is there are people out there who that are ready. Ready. They already accept it. They are ready to accept it, and we've Andy and I have both been fortunate enough to come across those people, and hopefully we are those people ourselves in our own teaching and the way we do things and where we go diving. Now, what people can do is look at your you've got a new class, right? The Essentials class.
Yep.
So what people learn about in there?
So January 16 is when I first ran the first classes. There was a couple of pilot classes. They were face-to-face classes. There was a lot of information. One of the suggestions at that stage was, could you put some pre-learning out? So what I did is I just created a short online class that was basically a voiceover of some of the slides. And then I could take some of that material out, the face-to-face stuff. And then the next but one class after that, they said, well, why don't you make that as a standalone product that people can learn some of this theory before coming into a face-to-face class? And that was released in June 2016. And the idea of that was to give people a number of different concepts to look at. So looking at what is human error, how does it happen, drift, violations, normalization of deviance, and then some real skills to look at, which come under this concept of non-technical skills. So situation awareness, decision-making, communication, teamwork, leadership and followership, and something called performance shaping factors. And then building beyond that, something called just culture and psychological safety. So the 3-hour course that I basically redid in a month, over a month, rewrote it all, reshot it, edited it, and it was released last Saturday, is in bite-sized chunks in 12 modules that look at those topics. And there's case studies to look at. There's little, I'm going to say assessments, but it's basically getting people to write down their thoughts. And I can provide some feedback and things to them. And the old version had got nearly 1,800 copies out there globally, of which 400 or so were pre-learning for the face-to-face classes that I'd run. And the rest of them were either direct from me or through instructors who use it as pre-learning for their technical classes or their instructor development classes. And they build that into the course price. And they basically say, right, you've got this 3-hour online learning to do before you pitch up, and it'll give you a basis of what human factors in diving is about. And I've had some really good feedback from people just having a shift of mindset. It's that bit of once you put the glasses on, you can't unsee the role of human factors in diving. In fact, I watched Free Guy last night with my son of just putting the new glasses on and see everything that was on. It's just like, and it's just like that. So I might make some memes actually based on that. So, and it's this, and I've had people come to me and say, Gareth, I blame you for looking at the world differently now. And it's like, and I take total responsibility too. So it's, so that essentials class is the foundation for the face-to-face programs, which are now starting back up after COVID being stopped since March last year. And there's also a 10-week program for people who want to invest a bit more time, all remotely. That 10-week program is a 1.5-hour webinar once on a Monday night. And then there's homework consolidation between the sessions to bring the theory to life. And people go, this is hard. You've got to think about stuff. It's like, yeah, I know. But that's where the learning happens, because if I'm forcing you to think, it's not like a tick, 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 and then the message is not in there.
So you're doing these classes online, all the courses online, and also like in a live, what we're doing right now, live video conference and PowerPoint and video learning or self-learning?
Yes, yeah. So that's what the 10-week webinar series is about. And I run them normally on a Monday. So I've got the first one is running at the moment, and it'll finish just before Christmas. And I also at one point ran 2 in a day. So I catered for Southeast Asia, Far East, and Australia, New Zealand. So I ran a morning class here in the UK, and then I ran an evening class. And the evening class covered Europe and the States. So that was good. And it was all Zoom based interactions. So the theory is about 60 minutes and there's 30 minutes of talk. So it's about getting interaction. And then there's homework that they've got to do through the learning management system I've got. And
everybody asks, who is it for? Who can take it? I guess you can say everybody, right? But what do you think? Who is the target audience? Who is the ones that benefit most, or does everybody benefit the same way? Or from your experience.
So those who are on the course are normally the curious, innovative, continual learners. And I've had divers with 20 dives on their name, and I've had instructor trainers on the class. So in terms of their experience set, they will always get something because I'm forcing them to reflect on their activities. And it's one of the, I'm going to say the curses of human factors is that it is general in nature and specific in application. So I can give you the theories of decision-making or communication. I can give you examples that are useful, but you have to then abstract that to your own environment. And that's where the sort of the dialogue happens. And I find it much easier when people say, oh, I've had this dive and this has happened. What do you think the reasons are? And I can talk through and we can have a discussion, we can have a dialogue to build into this, as opposed to me saying, oh, and this is what you need to know. Oh yeah, I know that. That's just common sense. Whereas actually it's about the specific piece. So yes, it's applicable to everybody, but it's probably got more applicability to those who are in higher risk environments, so technical rebreather cave, or instructor trainer roles, because you've definitely got more of a leadership, I'm going to say, responsibility and action in those environments. The others are, decision making and situation awareness, communication, followership, teamwork, the performance shaping factors. They're all relevant to everybody. But the leadership piece is very much in, once you start diving in teams, what the roles of leaders, and when you're an instructor, you are a leader. Where people go, oh no, I'm not a leader because I'm an instructor. Yeah, okay, well, you've got a team of students, and in fact, you've got two teams running at the same time. You've got a student and instructor team that are running, and then you've got a student team over here. And at the start of the class, what happens is that's quite a tight team, because the leader is controlling and directing what the team is doing. But as you go towards the class and the class progresses, ultimately you want that team to be able to go off and do their own thing, either as a team or as a bunch of individuals with other teams. So your role as an instructor is getting less as the class progresses, and there is more autonomy and self-decision making and self-discovery at this stage. Now, as you move across that, your style and interaction and how you communicate, the sort of language you use, shifts from being very directive to being very sort of hands-off, laissez-faire that goes on. But that sort of continuum isn't really talked about. This is how you teach, and it's one size fits all. But actually, this team is a dynamic, and it might be you only get to here. You never get to this stage across here. But you as an instructor, as a leader, have to adapt your interaction styles based on the maturity and the competence of the team and their task work below you.
I noticed that when I run a fundamentals class, for example, and we always get to here we basically cover the theory, we cover the field drills, and because of the nature of how the course is set up, we have basically, in essence, 2 days of diving. And I always notice on day one where, my instructions, the briefings, the talks that I'm having, the debriefings are very more, like you just said, very more direct, more directive. And then it's like this sort of, we'll have a gap of a week in between diving day one to diving day two. And it's in that gap, it's that sort of light bulb comes on for the students, and they sort of, it kind of clicks, because they've now got something which they can relate to, whereas we've talked about all this stuff. Now they've gone, okay, we're getting the water, I'm a qualified diver, I know this stuff, and actually they don't really know this stuff. Then that first diving day is always, it's a mess. The first time you get in the water, it's like, you talk about teamwork, you talk about how your skill, and it's just like you jump in, you get in the water, you start descending, and everybody just goes and they're gone.
Yeah.
What are we doing here, guys? Where are we going? Right, let's go, let's back up to the surface, let's talk about how we're supposed to do this, right? And when you give them that something that they can relate to, they then go back and we hopefully give them the skills or the idea that they can reflect back on that day. And then literally, like, it is like it's night and day, black and white between day one, day two. And you get to day two and it just all comes together, and they just go, okay, yeah, actually it's a team. And if I am that part of that team, and I'm playing that active role, and I'm really doing it properly, then everybody else finds it easier, and it kind of reciprocates as well, because, oh, I'm helping them, they'll help me, sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's not a competition as to, there's a quota on who's going to pass out of this. Everybody will get through this course, provided we actually work together.
And
that's
and if your goal is improvement, it doesn't matter even if you meet the end of course standards to pass the class.
Yeah.
So, fundamentally going in with an attitude that says this course is about improvement, you're going to improve. We as a leadership and followership team, we revolve around a common purpose that says, let's get better. And you can help me get better as an instructor, and I will help you get better as a student, as opposed to my job is to teach you to pass the class, which basically means you have no feedback to me to help me improve.
Yeah.
Because it's a one-way relationship.
Yeah. No, I do. I like the feedback aspect. I like the students feeding back and saying, they have their say and they feel that they have their say in all this.
Mm.
And and it comes across in different formats, of course. Some of it is more direct at a debriefing of the whole class, with the whole group there, and everybody sort of has their little say on it. Or it'll be more of a private conversation that they'll have. Maybe they'll send me a message or an email or something like that, and feedback and say, well, maybe this could have been, I'm not really comfortable with this sort of aspect of it, and how can I do better, or and it might reflect on my performance as well as an instructor. And I find this is it's fascinating for me, because it's like I teach. That's my career. Right, it's what I do. It's what I've always done, and I kind of pride myself. Like I know instructors around the world do. They pride themselves on their work and their professionalism, and being able to adapt to the scenario is a skill. It's not a given just because I've passed an instructor course and therefore I can teach. You've got the beginnings of the skills to teach. Now, can you teach? That's the difference. It's like, and not everybody learns the same way, right? And you have to read students and adjust and adapt and to their needs. And we've got to, I teach at school, right? I teach physics, so I'm continuously having to adapt to what my students need, and it's not a one size fits all. It's an evolving role, and I take that into the diving side of things as well. And when Andy said a minute ago, who is this course for? Who is this essentials course for? Who is human factors for? And you're going to say everybody. It is for everybody, right? I think I'm correct in saying that the scenarios that you put forward, the information that you get across in these courses, is applicable across a broad spectrum of industry.
And not just divers, right? I mean, even non-divers can benefit greatly from this one, right? I mean,
totally. The irony of I've taken my materials from aviation, from oil and gas, from the healthcare sector, from US forest firefighting teams, and I've packaged it into a diving platform. I've translated it into diver speak as to what it means. I've now had people who are coming onto my diving classes who are non-divers, want to learn about this stuff, and they take my material back into their sector because they go, oh, wow, this is great. And I've had, software teams have been quite popular recently because a lot of divers are software managers, program managers, engineers, whatever. And they go, we work in teams. We can use this. It's like, yeah, I know. So yes, it is global, which is great because you can talk about it. It's the stories that change. And if people don't understand it, you can invariably pick up a narrative. And actually, it's one of the ways that when I'm at conferences, and why I started this, we're talking about Homer, is I talk about a non-topic, related incident to the environment we're in. So if I'm going to go and talk in healthcare, which I've done, I don't start with a healthcare environment. If I'm diving, I don't talk about diving. What I do is I talk about something that people can relate to, and then they can understand the decision-making processes, how the communication or miscommunications happened, the problem with speaking up. And then you say, right, do you get that that's how the brain works, how people interact with the systems? Yeah, right. let's talk about a diving example now. Let's talk about an instructor who's got some brand new open water students. That instructor who's been around for a while. They've been around, done lots. They haven't had any peer checking. They haven't been checked by their organization for a while, and they've drifted from the standards that they were taught. What they will role model, their students will pick up. So a buddy check, pre-dive buddy check. Oh, that's only the students do that. Well, I'll watch this. Go on, students, you do your buddy check and I'll stand here. Okay, so why are you not part of that buddy check? You're part of that learning team. Oh, because I know that I've got my stuff. Right, so the role modeling says when you get to become an instructor, you don't need to do a pre-dive check, because that means you're good enough and you're not going to make the mistakes. Because the reason for the check is to pick up some mistakes that you may have made. But you've just demonstrated to me that by not doing a pre-dive check, you don't make mistakes.
Yeah. You know, I was going to ask if you had any specific sort of scenarios or situations that you've come across or people have you know, discussed in your classes, and you just happened to mention then an example there, right there. I was actually thinking that in my head, going, you know, all these people that they get to that level and then they don't actually follow through with what they've been taught. It's like, okay, I learned that as an open water diver. Yeah, cool, great, it was all good. I've never had to use it actually, and I've risen all the way up, and I'm now an instructor or whatever, instructor trainer.
Yeah.
You know, and they don't do a buddy check or a check of any variety whatsoever, and they jump in the water and they don't have their fins on.
Yeah.
Right. And it's like, what image and does that show to the students who are watching?
Oh, totally.
Jump in the water.
And I've had that on one of the classes where somebody gave that example and when it wasn't a problem because there isn't an issue. And it's like, yes, you're right. At that time when you jumped in and you didn't have your fins in, yes, it was a bit embarrassing. But what if one of your students had an issue and you were in the water and you can no longer get to them because you don't have strong enough propulsion to get there? So each one of these things is not enough in the main to cause a catastrophic failure. And that's really what the documentary, If Only, was about, that was released in May last year, which was all about a rebreather fatality that could be summed up as a diver jumped off the back of the boat with their oxygen cylinder turned off and they drowned after they went hypoxic. And you could just go, well, that's stupid, should have paid more attention, should have done a checklist. And then if you watch the documentary, which is only 34 minutes long, it will go through all of the factors that led up to that. And each one in their own wouldn't have been an issue. You know, the rebreather that he was using had a power save mode, which is a good idea. You know, you don't use it for 7 or 8 minutes, it powers down. Now, when that happens, it puts it back into surface mode, so a lower PO2. Now, 2 weeks before, Brian had jumped in the water with his rebreather turned off because it had powered down while they were getting ready. And he jumped in, and there's a fail-safe mechanism that basically turns it on and says, inject some oxygen. So he was fine. Unfortunately, on this particular occasion, his oxygen cylinder was isolated, turned off. And so the system turned itself back on, but it couldn't inject any oxygen because the cylinder was turned off. And so there was an opportunity to learn from a system failure, and system, I mean bigger, not just the rebreather, a system failure 2 weeks beforehand, but it wasn't picked up. And unfortunately, that then led into what happened on that particular day.
Yeah, that goes back to when I said people do things, we all do things, right? We get away with it.
Yeah.
You know, and then we don't actually have that incident that we can then learn from and then go, actually, I won't do that again because that was a near miss. We don't pick up the near misses because it just, like you said, jump in the water without your fins on. Yeah, we all have a laugh. I've been there. I'll put a hand up. I've been on the back of a boat and some instructor or whatever has jumped in and they haven't got their fins on, and it's been a laugh.
Yeah.
And nothing has gone wrong. So we don't have a take home from it. We don't have.
Oh, totally. There isn't an emotional trigger that said, shit, that was close.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And we don't have that. and you know, heavens above, we don't have any of those, right? Because we only learn from things, unfortunately, when there's accidents that happen, it seems.
Well, the spotlight gets drawn, and that's the point, is that the more severe the event, the more emotional it occurs.
Yeah.
And then people look at it. And in the way that social media operates, it's like this bubble, and it goes loads, and it dies down. There was an event a little while ago in the Galapagos Islands, which was in a diver ended up getting bent. They didn't understand their dive computer. There were a lot of factors that went on. And for about a week or so, it was like the thing that was being talked about. And then gradually it disappeared. And that learning was never, I've actually got, you know, I've screen grabbed it, and I'm going to put something together for the people involved, make sure that they're happy with it, and use it as a case study to say, look, this is the sort of thing that happens. And it's trying to get people to say, adverse events occur as deviations from normal, not necessarily deviations from the rules that are out there. Because often there's this bit of, oh, well, they didn't do a checklist, and they didn't do a buddy check, and they didn't analyze their gas and everything else like that. But you find that actually a lot of the time that was what normal looks like. And there is a finite capacity that we are able to manage, that all those balls that were holding up in the air at the same time, and you're going, yeah, fine. And then somebody gives you another one, you go, yeah, okay, another one. And then you drop one, and then it cascades, because then that's it. And so you've run out of capacity within the system to manage the number of deviations that you're dealing with. And in hindsight, we go, look at all those balls they dropped right then. And you go, let's go back a little bit and go, look at how many balls they were juggling immediately prior to that. Yeah. And then you say, how do we reduce the number of balls that are up in the air for that person? And that's about, you know, potentially creating a culture where people do checks, and they question each other. They do an effective brief, so they set the dive up for success. So people know what they're going to do when they get to the bottom of the shot line, and people go, oh no, let's go that way then. And it's down current, and now they're struggling, because when they turn around, they've got to go into the current, and they've been blown much further down the wreck than they were expected, or down the reef. And then they end the dive with less gas. And it's like, well, you should have paid more attention. Yeah, okay. You know, but I didn't know what the impact was going to be when we disappeared down that way.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's one of the things, and like, you know, we come back to it. It's not just a diving scenario that this happens for people. It's everybody. And, you know, it's like we started this by saying we wanted to get you over here to run a course for people. You know, just as an example of how little people put sort of, how do we say it? How little importance actually people are putting on what you're trying to do. You're a bit of a pioneer in this. We joked at the start of all this that you are a pioneer in this. Nobody's doing what you're doing, really. You know, there are a few, but you're really hammering it. But look, we tried to get people to sort of interested, and the uptake wasn't as big as I'd hoped, actually. And because I don't think people do put that level of importance on this, when actually this should be top of your agenda. This should be like, well, okay, yes, you've learned to dive, yes, you've learned to instruct and teach, but to then have this in your toolbox as well is only going to set you up for greater success. And unfortunately, that message is not getting out to enough people. And I like what I mean. I before all this happened, I signed up for my Tech 1 instructor ITC with Guy, actually, and I know Guy is one of your instructors.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and he's been on this podcast as well with us. And Guy actually includes the human factors, the essentials, or the human factors course with his ITCs. And I was due to sit it when if I was going to go to Canada at the time and get that done, but then I can't go. So But so I know that's on the tables for me.
In your area, Mark Crane, I've just totted up a bunch of, because I've redone how the instructors can build this into their programs. Mark's had 77 people go through and do classes. He's a really strong supporter of this. Yeah. And in the grand scheme of things, it's not, if somebody's going to spend $1,000 on a course to go and do a hypoxic trimix course or an instructor, I don't know how much an instructor development course is, $1,500, $2,000. It's another $50 to go and, build really in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah. What are you worried
about? Plus your travel to get there, plus, your food. I had one person speak to me over the weekend and said, really, I wanted to go to the conference, which was 2 weeks ago, which I ran. And he said, well, I've got to sort out money and things. I said, okay, I get that. It was $120 for a recordings ticket. And I went, you know what? Next time you get blown out because the weather's rubbish, go and get the course. Because actually $120 is way less than you would spend on a dive day, especially if you're going to go hard boat diving. By the time you've driven there, your parking, the boat fees, the gas fees, food, and beers afterwards. So, for quite a lot less than a day's diving, you can get 24 hours worth of content from the conference that's there, or, $97 for the essentials class, which is 3 hours worth of stuff that is targeted towards learning.
Yeah, it's really interesting because it's one of those things that you get me thinking, and like maybe like Andy and I, we should start pushing this more and more. It's that's part of the reason why we wanted to have it on the podcast with us, because we feel that for our community, and hopefully via YouTube and things, this can go a little bit more broad spectrum.
And some people don't understand what you're teaching. What are human factors? They just, it's interesting, but only when you start to explain to them, like you just did a little bit, then he's like, that's what it is. It applies to me as well. It's interesting. That's, I think, what we want to get out of there.
Yeah. Oh, totally. It's such a hard thing, and it requires, I've been working with a marketing specialist for ages. I said, you are so enthusiastic, and when people ask you the questions, you can get the comments and the answers to them, which is not really possible in a non-interactive environment. Because you read that and go, yeah, I get that. Or you might watch a short video and it's like, yeah, okay. But then you have to take that step. And that was one of the bits that I've had recently as well, sort of feedback. People are quite happy to support in a social media way. They'll tick, they'll like, they'll share, they might comment, and they go, yeah, it's really good. It's like, yeah, okay, but I don't see your names on any of the courses that are there. And the step to go from a sort of a supporter that looks good to talk about the events an adverse event, an incident you've had, to actually investing some time and money into making yourself better is actually a huge step, is a huge jump for people, because they feel that they've done their bit for learning by going, tick, read it, I understood that. But actually you've got to go and apply it. You've got to soak that knowledge in, and you've got to work out, how can I use it, because it is specific to you as an individual, and then go and apply it.
Yeah. Here's a question for you. You run these things online, right? As well as your courses, these things. Sorry. I don't want to sort of just demean your whole entire course there, like it's just a thing. After we've just talked about how important this is. But
you can leave that in the edit. There we go.
Yeah, we'll leave that in. It's fine. It's okay. It works. But no, your courses, you run them online and you run them in person, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do you find is better?
Experience. Most people get more out of the face-to-face class because they get the impact. So there's two ways of doing it online. There's the self-paced learning, which is the essentials class, which is 3 hours of little video clips, and people get a fair amount from that. Then there's the webinar-based, like a Zoom delivered stuff, and that worked. And I've run probably 8 or 9 of those now. So When COVID kicked off, I'd already run one, and I quickly dusted it off and then ran another one and went, right, let's do this. And that's been really positive. In fact, I had an aviation psychologist said, look, he'd been involved in crew resource management for ages. And he went, this is one of the best courses that I've been on in terms of learning. And in fact, I've just had somebody who's doing some work in Australia who said, I've gone to I'm going to say professional, I'm professional, it's my full-time job, but going to a formal organization to do a 2-week intensive course about human factors and investigations. And your 10-week program was better than the course that was delivered. And it cost a damn sight less than that other course did as well. Now, in the face-to-face, the learning is different, definitely, because I force people to be in an uncomfortable, uncertain situation, but it's psychologically safe. It's having fun. It's about putting people into unknown, uncertain situations, about operating as a team, and they may never have operated together and met each other before. And over that 2-day period, we start 8:30 on day one, we'll finish 5:30 day one, and then 8:30 to 5 o'clock on day two. By the time we get to the end of day two, everybody's quite emotionally tired, mentally tired, but they're absolutely buzzing because they've realized that they were a train wreck at the start of day one. So your point, Andy, of the same thing in the water, that everybody just goes, they don't know how to operate the simulator. The simulator has been designed that you can only operate it as a team of 4 or a team working together. So you exchange information. So the way it's set up is 2/3 of the information held on the other side and 2/3 held on my side. The computers are set up back to back, so you can't see each other. You can't see each other's screens. But the critical information is nearly always held by the other side. So if we were sitting at a table here and I would have my buddy and you two would be across there, we would need information from you to make our mini tasks successful. And you would need information from us to make your mini tasks successful on your side. And there are people going, it's all right, we can do this on our own. It's like 4 people operating on their own. It's like, and the way I run it as well, we have 2 observers. So we have 4 operators in the simulator and we have 2 observers, and we rotate the observer role, because the first time the guys on the outside, they just watch this train wreck arriving in front of them and they can see it and they're going, they've missed that. Why aren't they communicating? Everybody's head down and they're not paying attention. And then they sit in the operator's seat, and though 2 of those operators get out, and they're like, wow. So this is what it's like when you're on the outside looking in. It's like, yeah. So I always have observers, because people gain as much, if not more, being in the observation role than they do in the operational role. And then we roll around, and it's a fantastic experience, and everybody goes, everybody should be doing this. And that's why I've sort of scaled to having 5 instructors certified now, which happened in February last year. So some of them haven't even taught a class because everything closed down. No, in fact, everybody's taught class now. And then I've got 4 more instructors running at the moment, and they will be certified probably over the next 6 months. One of which is in Australia, a guy called Mike Mason, who's an ex-RAF Typhoon pilot now working for the Royal Australian Air Force. So I realized I couldn't continue to travel around the world like I was doing. So I had to train up other instructors, and that's what that purpose was. And I've got another program kicking off, starting Monday, one in Vancouver Island and another one in Cape Town. So they will graduate in February next year.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's important to get the message across, right? I mean, you're one man, and as great as you are, Gareth, as great as you are limited, right? In those circumstances. And the reason I ask what you think people would benefit more is because, we do have different learning styles, right? Everybody likes different things, and resonate. Different methods of teaching resonate with different people. And I've been online now. Well, not at the moment. We're back in school, but we spent pretty much 18 months online, and the difference in teaching that I noticed was immense, right? And you know, I always had this hole in the back of my head, this thought in the back of my head that people are always going to say, well, why do I need an instructor? Why do I need a teacher? I've got YouTube. Right?
Yeah.
And it's quite ironic this was going to go on YouTube, but I mean, but you know, why do I need these? And it's like, well, because of the person, right? It's you know, you are creating instructors for your course, and the personal side of things is what really makes the difference. Being able to, you know, to have that interaction face to face, you know, you get a lot more of the message across. You get a lot more engagement.
Totally.
You know, and
and you're able to dynamically adapt to what's going on in front of you. And that's, you know, the instructor development process is 6 months of them learning the theory, then delivering the theory. So they're not just slide readers. And then we have 2 classes where they run through. And I tell you what, as a learning experience for me, being an instructor who developed this, that was incredibly hard, because this is like my baby. And I had to seriously sit on my hands. And people have different styles. I sitting there going, right, that's the way they're going to deliver this. I don't mind how they do it. Well, I did at the time, because it's like, no, that's not how I do it. It was this bit that says, no, you've got to sit in your hand. You've got to let people develop their own style. And that's one of the things that's coming out now, is each of those instructors has to develop their own style and brand that goes with it. That's there.
I'm also wondering, as the the last sort of question in my mind is, are we, because of the use of technology over the past 18 months, 2 years, and how we've evolved our teaching, right? Before I never taught on Zoom, right?
Yeah.
And it was always face to face. Now, this might be something that you might need to adapt and edit your course, because are we, in essence, is there a human factor that we need to consider through our teaching from online rather than face to face? Because I know there's a lot of instructors that have been working very, very hard on e-learning courses. When you take out that person, the human side from your teaching, are we facing a situation where we haven't had an accident yet? We haven't had an incident occur that we've now got to then learn from? Or are we actually slipping into what we sort of talked about earlier, where we haven't got the common sense to adapt to it? What do you think?
I think for a start, the hardest bit is the incident reports we get probably never look at how teaching was delivered. They are so focused on the concept of proximal cause, time and space, close to the event. They don't look at how that training was delivered, how the knowledge was assessed, how it was checked. All of those, the way that knowledge is checked in the event of an adverse event or an incident, is you go back, look through the training record cards, and they go tick, 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 tick. There we go. They tick to understand all of the stuff, therefore they were taught properly. And we know that that's not the case. So there will probably be stuff that will go wrong in the future. Whether or not it's picked up because people don't go looking far enough back, I don't know. And it's also the instructors need to refresh and develop their skills in terms of how to deliver something, because they will have lost that. I know when I had big gaps where I wasn't teaching face to face, the first class back was just like, oh, it takes, a couple of hours to get back into the swing of it and going, right, okay, I know what I need to do now. And all of the little things that are there. So yes, I think it probably will have an impact. Whether or not we track it or capture it, don't know. Probably not.
I mean, I think there needs to be, because it's a certain skill, right, to teach face to face, but it's also a certain skill to teach.
It's a very different skill to teach online as well.
And I don't think we really, we've really factored that into, we've just like literally gone, let's flick a switch and let's suddenly go online and run our courses like this. And we basically run it as though we were in a classroom, but we're not
next to each other. Yeah,
we're not
exactly.
next to
Yeah.
each other. We're in the other side of town, or on different countries, right? In different countries. The three of us are sitting here. We're in 3 different countries. You know, and there isn't that side. And I don't know whether I'm not saying, and I'm going to put my hand up here, and I'm going to say that I am not doing things perfectly, and as well as I could do. And because now I'm actually thinking on my own teaching, right? It's like I'm learning that lesson, going, how can I do it better? Am I actually doing the best for my students? And getting that message across, and getting the lesson across how I would do face to face, because I can read.
Oh yeah, totally.
The engagement with the people is a lot more because they are face to face, and everybody kind of like sits there. You sit in a classroom, you kind of get uncomfortable if you don't say anything. Whereas you can sit on Zoom and just go mute, and literally for an hour just not say anything, and probably phase out.
All good, cool.
Probably end up just phasing out completely, right? And that's you know, something we really should be thinking about, I guess.
And the need for feedback in a remote delivery is massively increased. So your bit about, you know, I could probably get better, but then there's the question of what was missing. And if you haven't created that trust, that psychological safety with your students, that right from the outset that says, you know what, this is not going to be a perfect solution. There's going to be some gaps.
Yeah.
Tell me what those are, because I can't read you on the screen in the same way. I have a tendency to look at myself when I present, not at other people. So I don't get those nuances.
Yeah.
And as a consequence, you've got to get that back. In the physical classroom, you can see when people are fidgeting, or the eyes are like, okay, fine, right, time for a break. So yeah, there's a need to build that trust and psychological safety much higher for remote delivery.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I think we just about hit it, Gareth. You know, and honestly, it's, you know, I was fascinated with your course, you know, years ago when we first met, and I was introduced to it. And like I said, we wanted to get you over, and we will get you over as soon as somebody allows us to have people enter the
exactly.
But having said that, you obviously have your online version, and we may, you know, I know Andy and I will look at getting some of our people, getting involved. And you know what? It isn't a lot of money. It's in terms of what you actually gain from it, it's definitely worthwhile. And you do learn a hell of a lot. So, you know, anybody who is watching this and has lasted this long on this podcast, you know, the thing is, get signing on to it, right? And we'll put some links onto your courses. So
that's great.
People can get some more information, and you know, we'll hashtag the crap out of this. So be all over.
And I'll reciprocate when it goes online. That's cool.
And
excellent. Well, thank you very much, gents. I really appreciate the
Gareth.
opportunity to talk and be evangelical about it like I normally am. So thank you.
That's great. And I hope we can all just meet up again soon, whether it's ADEX in Singapore, or whether it's in the UK, or a GUE conference, or whatever it is.
Exactly.
All right. That's great. Well, thanks for being on the Deco Mix podcast with us, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Gareth.
Thanks so much, guys. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.